I've always been interested in my heritage as a granddaughter of two survivors. My grandma Rosalie, who is turning 101, my grandpa Dave would regularly talk about things from, their stories and their past. They had funny accents. I knew my grandpa had the tattoo, so I knew I was different, and never really nurtured or explored it till I found 3GNY, where I was really able to really shine with all of this. So yeah, Grandma Rosalie's here. She was born on November 25th, 1922 in Kielce, Poland, the oldest of five siblings. Right before her 17th birthday, Germany invaded Poland, and the family was forced to move around multiple times. In May 1942, Rosalie and her sister Regina went to labor camps, and her brother Harold too. Rosalie and Regina went to a thread manufacturing factory in Parsnitz, which was a German-occupied Sudetenland region of now the Czech Republic. And they survived the war there. Not going to go into the full story. You'll see that later. I just wanted to share a little bit about my background. My grandparents met after the war, had my dad Saul in a DP camp, and came to the U.S. in 1947 on the Ernie Pile, and settled. My grandma had cousins here, and relatives, so that's how they came here. Okay, I'm going to move on to talk more about 3GNY now. So we're an organization for grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance. Main focus is anti-Semitism, and also to provide a supportive community for grandchildren of survivors. There's a lot of us out there that are very interested and really want to explore what this means and how we can always promise our grandparents that we're never going to forget, and we're going to make sure that their legacies continue for generations to come. So yeah, as you all know, there's not many survivors left. I know that it's a great privilege and honor to still have a living grandparent. Luckily, many grandparents did share their stories or record with the Shoah Foundation. I know many did not, and there's some 3Gs that are trying to learn their stories in many different ways. But we are using our history and family stories to be a living link to the Holocaust. A big piece is addressing anti-Semitism today, which is more important than ever now. And this also reinforces the importance of having Holocaust education in the schools. It's not everywhere, and our goal is to make it everywhere. And the big thing about community, again, having a place to go and somewhere to fit in as a grandchild of survivors, especially now. So I'll talk now about We Educate. It's 3GNY's flagship educational initiative. So when we started in 2005, we had a lot of events to really build a community, but we wanted to take it a step further and do action, do something with our unique history. So we created We Do, which is short for We Educate. We had guidance from Facing History and from Yad Vashem to help us craft this 4-week training program where 3Gs will, once a week for a couple hours, meet with educators and facilitators to learn how to gather the details, compile facts and history and artifact documents to put together a compelling way to share their family's story of surviving the Holocaust. You're going to see this, Jolie and Allison, do this shortly. And yeah, after they go through the training, and they could speak more about their experience. It's a class of maybe 12 3Gs together, really helping each other, supporting each other, learning their stories together. So you really bond with these people in a way that it's just very meaningful. I did the program in 2010, so a very long time ago. And what's really nice is we have our educators there to help refresh your story and always refine it and make it better. So I'm looking forward to doing that so I can go out and speak in schools more as well. So yeah, like I said, once our speakers are equipped and ready to go, we have connections all over New York. And I'll talk more broadly, basically around the country, sending speakers into schools. Our most busy time is Yom HaShoah, sometimes January. But now with everything going on, we're pushing to get more speakers out there right now. So our impact, as you see, we were founded by a group of 6. We're now over 7,000 community members, which includes volunteers, donors, 3Gs themselves, grateful to all of the 2Gs and just Jewish community members and non-Jewish community members who've supported us over the years, as well as some of the teachers who are so moved by this work. They're some of our biggest champions as well. So we have trained since 2010 more than 500 speakers. What's really, really impactful about COVID turned out to be a blessing in disguise as far as our reach. We turned the trainings virtual, where we were able to go out to other markets besides New York. We had a training in DC, Wisconsin, even Sydney, Canada. And we're bringing our training program to other 3G groups that we've helped launch throughout the country. There's now 12 of them. So we're really proud of that. And with all of the, now that, the pandemic's kind of ending, we've gone back to some in person, but the virtual ones have made it easier and more accessible for many people. I know there was a slide about growth. I'd love to talk about that quickly. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I just want to talk more about 2020 and COVID. In addition to upping our training, we also were able to share the family stories for a wide audience. I created a program called We Do Wednesdays, where speakers like Julie and Allison would share their stories with a wide audience all over Zoom every other Wednesday, starting in the summer of 2020. We would have hundreds and hundreds of people signing on to hear our stories, and that's really how our growth exploded in terms of more training programs, more donations, and helping more 3G groups grow. We had enough donations to hire a full-time executive director and a part-time staff member. So that was really impactful in our growth. And I'm gonna just talk about where we're going next before I hand the mic over. So throughout all of this, we've gained so much attention from large donors, and we're having a partnership now with the USC Shoah Foundation to launch something called Living Links, which is a national umbrella organization of all the 12 3G organizations started by 3GNY, where we're gonna centralize the training program, honestly, because it's run by volunteers, and the demand for 3Gs who wanna learn their family stories and present them outgrew the way that we were able to keep up with. We didn't have enough people to run the trainings. So thanks to all of this support, you're gonna be hearing more about that. 3GNY is gonna still operate independently because we're gonna up our local chapters to placing our 500 speakers in schools. Because of everything going on now, that's the priority, and that's where we need to focus, getting our education, Holocaust education in the schools, and tying it back to the anti-Semitism that we're seeing every day as 3Gs relate to it from our family stories. So that's what's next. Really excited. We can open up for questions later. Again, I wanted to thank everybody and pass the mic on to the Wadowski sisters.
Can everyone hear us? Can you hear me? Okay. Hold it down. Oh, wait. It's minimized. We're in Google Chrome. We're just waiting for our presentation.
I'll get back to this later, but if any of you have no teachers anywhere, synagogues, community groups, churches, wherever we can get our speakers in, especially now. I have brochures here, I have cards. Please, please, please use us. Thank you.
first, I'd like to just thank everyone so much for coming and welcoming us to share our grandfather's story and 85 years since Kristallnacht, and also to hear Gail speak and just hear about this fantastic organization that we have now become involved in. So,
And we can speak a little bit more about it at the end. We were trained, we did We Do together, Jolie and I, in January and February of this year. So like Gail said, it was about a 6-week course. We met on Zoom, which was, I guess, a blessing in disguise because we had students from Florida, Washington, D.C., I think Boston, in our cohort of about 12 to 15 students. And every week we would learn how to write and piece together our grandfather's story. We're grandchildren of actually 2 survivors. You'll hear that in our story. They ask that you pick just one survivor to focus on.
so now we're gonna share. So this is our Zadie story.
So during our presentation, we're going to refer to our Zadie as Zadie. Zadie is the Yiddish word for grandfather, for those of you who don't know. And for our entire life, we only referred to our grandfather as Zadie. Zadie's real name was Samuel, or Sam for short, and he was born almost 100 years ago on January 25th, 1925. And here are some photos of Zadie and us. So on the right is Zadie and Jolie at one of our favorite pizzerias, and on the left is a photo of us at Zadie's bungalow colony. The photos were taken about 10 years ago when our Zadie was 85 years old.
So now the early years of the war, or prior to the war, 1925 to 1939, will set the story. So Zadie was born in Zdunska Wola, Poland on January 15th of 1925. He had 10 brothers and sisters, so there were 11 of them, and he was number 10 to his parents, Dovid and Bela. And my Zadie lost his father at a very young age, so he actually learned to say Kaddish while standing on a chair as a little boy with the other adults around him before he even knew how to read or write. And his mother, our great-grandmother, was a very strong woman. At the time, it was very uncommon for women to work, but after losing her husband, she moved the entire family, 11 children, to the big city of Lodz in order to survive. And this was in the 1930s. At the time, they were very poor.
So then we're going to move to the years of the war. Perfect. Okay, so on September 1st, 1939, our Zadie recalled how he remembered seeing airplanes fly over the sky over Lodz one day. There was some unease in Lodz on that day, and with the rise of Hitler and neighboring Germany, and Hitler setting his intentions clear, people were nervous. People gathered to see the planes, but many thought it was nothing. Zadie told us of the announcements that people made that day in Polish, and the translation is on the bottom in the blue, that Great Britain and France are coming to rescue us. This is what they thought would happen in the next couple of days, but of course they were all mistaken.
So now Zadie was only a teenager when the Nazis marched through the streets of Lodz in September of 1939, and it soon became known as the Lodz Ghetto. And the Nazis came in, depriving him of his innocence and his youth, and any opportunity for him to further his education. Up until now, my Zadie was going to school. He went to a regular public school. He went to Hebrew school growing up, and at this time, he was 14 years old. And many of the students that we speak to and the schools that we go to, the children are younger than 14. So it puts it into perspective for them, and they do understand. And his teenage years were spent in the ghetto, where survival every single day was a struggle. And now they lived in Lodz, a city. So this was a large ghetto in the center of the city, but smaller ghettos were popping up on the outskirts and in rural towns. And while some people initially thought the ghettos were more comfortable, they were safe with their family and friends, they thought that they could spend the war kind of hiding out in these ghettos away from the terror, but they were very mistaken. So there was no heat in the ghettos, there was very little food, typhus spread like wildfire, and killed so many people as they had no access to healthcare at this time. And now during this time, our Zadie worked a lot of odd end jobs just to help feed his family and scrounge by with extra money. But even his small paycheck did not do enough. There was barely enough food. Now, luckily, one of our Zadie's sisters worked at a bakery, so they were a tiny bit better off. She was able to bring some food home at the end of the day, but by no means was anyone eating well. And there were food rations and restrictions set throughout the ghetto. So when people were allowed to grocery shop at set times, typically there was not even any food left for them. Similar today to how many of us are loud and proud about the causes and injustices that we believe in, one of my Zadie's brothers was very involved with the Resistance Party. And the Resistance Party was the group of people, some were Jewish, some were not, who were fighting against Hitler and the war efforts. They wanted to save victims and hide them or help them get to safety. And the Nazis were on to my Zadie's brother, who was part of the resistance, and threatened to take him and his family unless they gave him up. So he actually committed suicide by taking a cyanide pill to poison himself in order to save the rest of his family. And so he was viewed to be incredibly brave and selfless, though his body was never recovered. Now, there is a memorial in Nachala Yitzhak Cemetery in Tel Aviv, as you can see, and this is a place where other prominent cultural and military figures are buried. And then my mom recalled our Zadie once sharing the story of his brother Chaim, and the story brought tears to Zadie's eyes. While it was incredibly sad, Zadie was so proud that his brother did something so righteous and was remembered as a martyr.
So our family survived the ghetto for about 4 years until they were transported in the summer of 1944 from the Lodz ghetto to Auschwitz. Our Zadie was taken by train on a cattle car with no bathrooms, no food, no access to water. By the time Zadie was on the transport in the cattle car, most of his family had already drifted away from the ghetto. Either they had tried to escape or were likely murdered and assumed dead, and my Zadie didn't know where they were. Or another possibility was that they were taken on earlier transports to the concentration camps. Zadie was taken with his mother and his youngest sister, so a mother and 2 children, to Auschwitz. And in Auschwitz, Zadie came face to face with the famous Dr. Joseph Mengele. With a tap of the stick, the doctor sent most Jewish people one of 2 ways. The people to the right were sent to be worked to death. The people on the left were promised hot showers, but they were met with gas chambers instead, where they suffocated to death. Dr. Mengele provided absolutely no medical care. Our Zadie was sent to the right while helplessly watching his mother and sister sent to the left. He was now alone. It was the last time he ever saw his mother and sister, and the last of his family was gone.
So now let's talk about the story surviving Auschwitz and Kaufering work camps. Arbeit macht frei is written at the entrance of Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland, 150 miles away from his home in the Lodz ghetto. And this phrase is a German phrase meaning work sets you free. But it's quite ironic. The work camps did the opposite, right? So they didn't set people free. This camp alone is where over 1 million people, 1 million Jewish people, were murdered in the harshest of conditions. Auschwitz is known as the deadliest camp in all of Europe. Now, Sam Wadowski, a boy who once had a normal life in Poland, lost his name and was now only to be known as A-11-2252. And Zadie spent 2 months in Auschwitz and then was taken to work in a camp in Kaufering, Germany. This is a sub-camp of Dachau near Munich. And he spent several months working and living in a cement factory. Well, I don't want to simply skip over my Zadie's time in Auschwitz. There's so much to cover. We could spend weeks talking about it. And the camps. The conditions were inhumane. People lived on top of one another. There was barely enough food. And half of all the people at this next camp were worked to death through forced labor, or they were murdered. It was always a struggle to get food, and Zadie had to find his own place to sleep. And he said that the taste of cement was always in the air. All the food tasted like cement, the water tasted like cement. And as you can see, the barracks are partially underground, so he never got a glimpse of sunlight outside.
So on to liberation in April of 1945. So somehow, after working in all these inhumane conditions, Arzadi survived these series of concentration and work camps, but was finally liberated by the Allies in 1945. He was on a work train that was bombarded by the Americans. Upon arrival, the American soldiers pried open the boxcar and bodies fell out. Zadie was one of the few straggling survivors. He was one of the survivors that fell out of the train. He ran into the forest with a few of his fellow survivors, and running into the forest had nowhere to go. He spent one night in a barn with the other escapees after going from house to house, begging people for help and being denied and denied. Finally, he found someone who let them stay in their barn. So he stayed in the barn for one night, and the next day he encountered the American troops who brought them to safety. To my sister and me, he was always just our Zadie, but to the world, he was a Holocaust survivor and an eyewitness to history.
So now we'll talk about displaced persons camps, and I may just refer to this as a DP camp. That's what I'm talking about. And while there were few survivors, the ones that survived now had nowhere to go. With no money and most without family, the survivors lived in new types of camps called DP camps. And while conditions were initially similar to the concentration camps, they eventually became better over time. And here in these camps, people worked together in order to integrate back into a normal life. They set up makeshift schools to continue their education. Simchas were celebrated again, babies were born, and many people who were now alone without family clung to each other. They clung to other survivors who understood the trauma that each other had endured. Now, one thing I thought was very interesting that Arzadi shared or admitted to us probably about 15 years ago at this point was that at his time in the DP camp, he actually bought some materials. I don't know how he got money, but he bought some cigarettes and whiskey, and he got some empty bottles, and he diluted the whiskey, put false labels on it, and sold it to the American soldiers. So that was his way of surviving. And, it was, as a young child hearing his story, it was really eye-opening that, like, my Zadie, an older righteous man, could do something so mischievous. So again, that helped me understand that my Zadie was just a young kid when his life turned upside down. Change the slide. So here Zadie met his beloved wife, my grandma Eva, in the DP camp, which was in Landsberg, Germany. And it was love at first sight. Her name was Eva Moskowitz, or Grandma Eva to me. My Zadie said, I was lonely, she was lonely, so we built a life together. And they got married in 1947, and they were inseparable for 57 years until our grandmother passed away in 2004. And now our grandmother also survived the horrors of the war, though my relatives have shared that they believe she truly never recovered. She was sick for many years with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and finally Alzheimer's disease. And it just showed that the war had an everlasting effect on those who endured the horrors of the Holocaust.
So in 1949, they had a baby in the DP camp in Germany, and soon they were after a new life in the United States. Their new life was set to begin. In America, they said the streets were paved with gold. A new country with new customs, different money, a different language, new skills needed to make a living. Arzadi already spoke Polish, Yiddish, and German, and of course, when he came to America, he had to learn English. He learned a little bit of English from the American soldiers in a DP camp, but when he came to America, he learned much better English, but he always had an accent. When they came to America, it was Highest, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, who helped our grandparents and their new baby emigrate to America. They actually ended up in Boston for a month, but then they took the train down to New York when they stayed in the Paris Hotel, which is in the picture. This was a famous hotel for Jewish refugees in Manhattan. At this point, Zadie's brother-in-law was able to sponsor them, and they were able to get an apartment in the Bronx where they lived for 2 years. So they lived in the Bronx from 1950 to 1952 in their first Bronx apartment. And then they were able to establish themselves and move to a different apartment in the Bronx. By now, our grandmother was pregnant, with her second child, our other uncle. And Zadie had to somehow earn a living with 2 small children at home. At first, Zadie earned a living as a Heidelmacher, a hat maker, but people stopped wearing hats, so that didn't work out very well for him. Then he became a New York City taxi driver. He bought a taxi medallion and earned a living driving a taxi. And then he was able to afford and buy a house in Flushing, Queens, which actually seemed extravagant at the time, where they raised their family, which now also included a third son, our father, where Zadie lived in that house in Flushing, Queens for 47 years.
And Zadie and our grandma Eva, along with their 3 sons, spent their summers at their bungalow. And many of you may know a bungalow is a small summer home in the Catskills. Every summer, many Jewish New Yorkers fled from busy New York City to relax by mountains. And at this point in the 1950s, more than 1 million people inhabited the summer world of bungalow colonies, summer camps, and small hotels. And these bungalow colonies helped shape American Jewish culture, enabling Jewish people from Eastern Europe mostly to become more American, while at the same time introducing the American public to this immigrant Jewish culture. And my grandparents had a bungalow, a home that was located in a colony of other homes, all belonging to survivors. And Zadie's bungalow was a huge part of my dad's life and my uncle's childhood. And it became a part of our life while we were growing up. We visited Zadie there every summer.
We have a lot of memories from the bungalow.
Okay. And the photo on the right is actually at our middle uncle's bar mitzvah. So we were able to come to America and celebrate again, practice being Jewish and proud.
And that little boy is our dad. Like many survivors, our Zadie struggled with the memories of lost family. He only had 2 cousins who survived the war with him, one in the United States, one in Brooklyn, and one in Israel. But then in 1965, a miracle happened. Our Zadie found a brother, Tzvi, who was 6 years older than him, alive in Israel. Tzvi had run away to Russia in 1939 just as the war broke out. And after the war, they somehow missed each other. Each presumed the other was dead. So after 26 years, by the fate of God, they were united. They had phone conversations every Friday before Shabbat, and they visited each other 8 times until Tzvi passed away in 2010. I was lucky enough to be, I think, the only grandchild to meet our Tzvi, our Uncle Tzvi, in 2008 when I went to Israel. So I went to Israel first time with my sleepaway camp in 2008, and my Zadie had set up that Tzvi and my other family in Israel come to the airport and meet my group. And it was me on a bus of all NJY campers, and I was the only one who had family and a big sign that said, "Welcome to Israel," because our Zadie was just so happy that I was able to go to Israel and meet his brother. And I remember by the time I met my Zadie's brother, he was almost blind, so he couldn't really see me. So what he would touch my face to try and see what I looked like, because that was the way he could communicate. And I remember my Zadie, if you could tell from the pictures, had these beautiful big blue eyes. And I remember Tzvi looking exactly like my Zadie.
And something that I loved was that Tzvi went to Israel, Zadie came to America. So Tzvi learned Hebrew and Zadie learned English, so they still spoke to each other either in Yiddish or Polish. And now we can move on. The Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And on the next slide, let's see how Zadie loved all of his grandchildren. He never missed a birthday. He didn't understand why we all went to college so far away. He would say, "What was wrong with Queens College down the road?" But he especially always loved his family gatherings and celebrating holidays together. They must have reminded him of growing up with his large family. And he loved that we were having such a nice childhood filled with family and simchas and holidays. And he beamed at every accomplishment we had throughout our childhood, uh, since his own was ripped away from him. And on the next slide, we could see that Zadie's life always revolved around his shul. He was an active member at the Garden Jewish Center of Flushing for over 50 years. He was there every Shabbat, for every holiday, every event. Whenever they needed a minyan, and even with bingo, he was always there to help out. He could lead a service, read from the Torah, read Haftorah on a moment's notice. And when he could no longer keep up with maintaining his house, he moved into an apartment in 2013 where he was loved by all. He was so popular that they nicknamed him the mayor. And he was always welcomed on Shabbat, holiday services, those around him. And oftentimes, young boys from the yeshiva next door would celebrate Shabbat with him. And he loved talking to them, listening, praying, singing with the students. He was a Jewish hero to them, and he shared his story with the yeshiva boys as well. And in the last few years of his life, he became very active at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College. He participated in a Friday morning bagels and talk survivors group. So he spoke to and he educated dozens of students over the years. Can you just press play? Yeah. Oh, can you pause it?
So we'll see if we can get the sound working. It's our Zadie talking at the Bagel Talk Friday at Queensborough.
Okay. That's okay.
It's okay. So we'll get to watch the video at a later date. But can we just keep going with the presentation? Yeah. So sorry for the technical difficulties, but we'll keep going with the presentation. So in 2015, our family was contacted to participate in a photo shoot for a book called Still Here. So there's a picture of the book, and then we have the book on the mantle. So what Still Here is, it's a book filled with survivors and liberators from the Holocaust. And the photographer is also a 3G, just like us, a third generation Holocaust survivor. And this book contains pictures of survivors and liberators in their 80s and 90s. And while creating this book, Brian Marcus set up a photo shoot with each family and included their families in the photo shoot. And the implications from the book is we are still here, we are descendants, and we are proud, and we are here. And we brought the book here today if you want to take a look. And can I tell the story about the book? So when we bought the book, we would visit Zadie every Sunday. And my sister and I took turns because first I was away in college and then she was away in college. So I happened to be home from college and Jolie was away, and I brought the book and I said, Zadie, I just want you to sign the book, please. So he wrote, "My dearest Allison, you are my favorite grandchild. I love you so much." So I brought it home to my mom and I was so happy. I said, "Look, Zadie signed the book." And she made me bring the book back to him next week and said, "Make him add your sister's name."
Continue. And now as the spring and summer of 2018 went on, Zadie was 93. His body and brain could only take so much. In the end, Zadie often spoke in Polish. What an irony. Now he needed to communicate with us and he couldn't communicate at all. He passed on September 7th on a Friday, right before Shabbat began, right before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And according to Jewish law, anyone who passes away on the eve of Shabbat is known as a tzaddik, which is a person who represents righteousness. And that was definitely my Zadie, our Zadie. And I only hope our Zadie is now with our grandma Eva, who he missed terribly the last 14 years of his life.
So our Zadie lived from January 15th, 1925 to September 7th, 2018. And at this time, I think we would like to take a moment of silence for all the victims of the Holocaust atrocity and the victims of the October 7th massacre as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that this really is inspiring. I'm going to open up this question. Just note that your father, Bob, is here as Zadie's son. So thank you for coming and for sharing your story. It's not easy to do that. So with that, any questions for Gail or for Allison or Jolie?
Well, first off, I'd just like to say we want to just share a short few bits about the We Do experience of helping us learn our story. So my sister and I and our cousins, actually, we have a yearly Hanukkah party, and one year our Zadie sat down and he told us all the stories. So his grandchildren interviewed him, and it was really the first time that we had heard the story from beginning to end. And you know, I was always proud to say that I was a survivor's grandchild, but I didn't fully really know what it meant. And until I took the class We Do, I had been to Auschwitz and I had been to Dachau, but really taking this class and the tools from 3GNY helped me put this together. And it was really amazing to, you know, take this story, take parts of my family, take public speaking, and be able to make it a digestible story that I can share. And really the impact of me going into classrooms with children, some of whom have never met a Jew, has really been phenomenal. So taking this class in 3GNY is such a valuable tool. And I think my sister would agree.
Yeah, so, and our target audience is children, school-age children. So we tried to make the story appropriate for children. We use some maybe more advanced terminology today just because people in this room are a little more familiar with some of the terms, but that's why the story is, again, meant to be digestible for children. We try to keep it brief. We try to keep it relatable. And so far, we've been super successful getting opportunities to speak, not as much as we want to, because most of the speaking opportunities are during the school day. But if anyone has any connections to schools, we would love to speak. And of course, Zoom has also brought us so many other opportunities where we just can't be in person.
But so now we'd love to open the floor for questions, also for Gail. And thank you for being such a good audience.
Questions? Anybody have questions?
Hello, Allison and Julie. Oh, sorry. I have a daughter named Julie. Sorry. So you mentioned the miracle of Zaidi meeting his brother Zvi. Can you give a little more background to that? Because I actually kind of know a little bit of the story, and I think it's an awesome story that you'd like to share with the crowd.
Sure, I'll start and then Jolie can fill in any missing details. So we have Zadie had survived with two cousins, one who was in Brooklyn and one who was in Israel. Ben Shlomo was in Israel. And Ben Shlomo was in a hospital in Israel and heard over the loudspeaker in the hospital something about Wadowski, and that's our last name. And when he heard this, he ran over to the head nurse's station and he said, "Who is this Wadowski? Hearing. I'm hearing over the loudspeaker." And with a little more investigation, Tzvi was in the hospital, and that's how they made a connection. So it was because of an experience in the hospital, hearing his name over the loudspeaker. We can always repeat the question.
Did your father ever meet his brother Zvi?
Father, did you ever meet Zvi?
So Zadie and Tzvi were able to see each other 8 times, but they spoke on the phone weekly. And he came to our parents' wedding, so he did meet them. And I believe when our Zadie found out, they told his cousin Archie first. And they brought some people over to my Zadie's house and sat him down because it was big news. So it was a big deal telling him that Tzvi was alive after 26 years of thinking each other was dead.
Hi, thanks for a wonderful presentation. I'm curious if there's a group that goes to middle schools and high schools, not just primary schools. And sort of the second part to that question would be, how do you anticipate you will maybe modify the discussion in view of the challenges ahead in speaking to an older youth audience?
So I'll take this. Thank you for your question. To clarify, we do only speak in middle and high schools right now. So it is tailored toward older audiences. I think we're looking into ways to get to younger students, but right now most of the teachers and the demands is for those students. Given the current situation, we're actually in talks right now about how to incorporate it. Just to make clear, our speakers are not historians or Holocaust experts, nor are they experts on Israel or the situation. They're experts on their own family experiences, fighting anti-Semitism today. So they're equipped to talk about how they feel about the rise in anti-Semitism as a, third generation survivor. And as we have more, talks, to make sure our speakers are comfortable, figuring out how to answer some difficult questions related to that, that's going to be rolling out, right now. So we're very aware of the need for it.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that question, is your target audience only public schools? And do you target after-school programs, congregational school programs?
Yeah, so we speak in a variety of places. We do have a lot of ties with New York City public schools, which, as you know, is critical right now. Private schools as well, synagogues. Again, like I mentioned, looking to get into more churches. We have some feelers out about speaking in colleges. Obviously, another huge need. Does that answer your question?
Can you give us some idea of how the students respond to your presentations? Because I think not only is that important, I'm curious about what they bring home to their parents, who also need to know about this.
I'm going to let the sisters talk about that more, but I do know that many of the students ask a lot of questions and are really paying attention, and are really learn something new and are really moved by what they hear.
So with Jolie's more flexible schedule than mine. Since we've been trained, I've only had the opportunity to speak in one school, the school where I teach, North High School, and the audience was silent. I could hear a pin drop. The bell rang because the presentation had went over because it was a two-part presentation, and I said, okay, this is a good place to stop. We can dismiss the kids. And my principal said, absolutely not. You're going to continue on. And then when I was finished with the presentation, I said, okay, I thought he's going to dismiss the kids. And no, he even wanted them to have questions and answers. So he extended the presentation a whole period because of the amazing response it got. It was a unique situation because I was in the school where I teach, and I was getting emails for days after of students who I don't even know, I don't even have in the classroom, thanking me, telling me how much their story touched me. So really positive response. And Jolie, want to speak about?
Yeah, I think it's great to hear that. I got to hear my sister speak to Great Neck North, which is a predominantly Jewish community. And then I've had the opportunity to speak to schools upstate. I've gone to high schools in New Jersey, and I've spoken on Zoom. And the response is always really overwhelming. I think I have a friendly face. I usually introduce myself and kind of say things about myself that really paint the picture that I'm just a regular person, just like them. And that I want this to be a safe space to have an open discussion. So the students have really, I've gotten great feedback from teachers, and the students really feel comfortable asking such a variety of questions. You know, you prepare for the hard questions, and then children ask every other question. So it's always really interesting to hear what other people's takeaways are. And I think answering questions is one of my favorite parts. Just it makes my story stronger because sometimes I take a look at weak spots or, you know, things from a different perspective.
I'm next. So thank you all for such a moving and powerful program. So the question I have relates to your grandma Eva. I understand that you are now trying to piece together her life and her experience. And the question I have is, will you have to go through the program again once you piece that information together?
So funny enough, we have a cousin that lives across the street from me. And she's
She's on our grandmother's
she's
side.
on her grandmother's side. My dad and her parents are first cousins. So on that side of the family, there's 5 or 6 survivors. So I'm now in contact with her to get that story out. And I don't know. I don't think I need to do We Do again. I think it's more important to give those resources to other people. But I definitely thought that the education I got from We Do prepared me to not only speak about my grandfather's story and use that for my grandmother's story, but even just with public speaking and the idea of ways to grasp people's attention and what details to focus on and how to tailor to specific audiences. So I would love to do the class again and meet other people like me, but I don't think so.
One thing, if she doesn't do the full class again, we do have experienced educators and facilitators to help guide her, and we'll have one-on-one meetings and practice sessions like we did the other day to make sure that she's confident and ready to share the story. So yeah, there's yes, exactly. We have writers workshops also, and there's a lot of small group work with the speakers to continually nurture them and make sure they're comfortable and ready.
I am a Holocaust survivor, and I belong to a group that's called Names, Not Numbers. You can look it up on the internet. We only speak to schools, and in fact, I have an appointment for December 19 in North Shore, the school. And I guess when we speak to children, it's different than what you're doing. But it's very interesting because it almost goes parallel, the stories. So ever so often I get a call and they say, don't say no. On this such and such day, you're going to be in this and this school. So it was very gratifying to listen to you.
Thank you for coming to listen.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your story. We always say as many 3Gs that could meet, and students that could meet survivors, that's our first choice. And our speakers are a great supplement to a survivor if people are lucky enough to meet one.
There have been a lot of studies for children of Holocaust survivors, a lot of studies. And I'm wondering if there have been any studies done for grandchildren of survivors.
Very good question. I don't know specifically. I know a lot of as we've been coming together to form the national organization, we've been collecting data just in terms of 3Gs involved in different areas of the country. But I don't have those answers right now. But as we grow, I think there's a lot of opportunity to get, to have those.
Hi, thanks again for being here today. I'm in the back. When you speak at schools where how the Holocaust is not part of the history curriculum, what do you do, or what does the school do in advance of your visit? Because your story is beautiful, but in the context of not understanding or even knowing what the Holocaust is, it's sort of, that might go on deaf ears, so to speak. So how do you handle that?
So right now we're primarily in places where there is background and Holocaust education. Our speakers are given information on what the students are also doing. If they're reading a book, for example, if they have a survivor, if what the lesson is, so that our speakers can accompany what's already being done. But you do raise a good point that we need to get into the places that don't do it.
Has the organization connected with Hillels in college? Because college kids really need this also. I don't know if it's the Hillel or the Chabad, and of course the Hillel kids, it's good for them to hear, but all the other kids need to hear it. And my second part is, have you ever had anyone heckle you or just talk or just be disrespectful when you're talking, which can happen in colleges? I don't know about high schools with their principals standing right there. Colleges, they believe in more freedom of speech.
I'll answer the first part of the colleges. So we're not in them really right now. I believe ADL is, doing a lot of work with Hillels, but, we're looking to get into it. I know there's been discussion around fraternities and sororities as well. So, we have a lot of work ahead. But I think that's a really great idea. Even the Chabads or wherever, we can get our speakers. And then I'm going to have them share the other part of it.
No, I've never been heckled. I think maybe students come in thinking I'm going to look one way or speak about something one way, but all of the responses have luckily been really great. And hopefully will continue. But I would challenge. I'm not afraid. I'm so proud to be Jewish. I'm so proud of my history. So not that I want to be heckled, but I wouldn't mind being challenged and educating people.
If okay, I just want to say one more quick thing I didn't go over in the beginning. So a big piece of the 3GNY besides the education is the community building, and we have many events, many in New York City, and now some on Long Island, as many of us left the city and came to Long Island a lot during COVID. So, we have Shabbat dinners with survivor speakers, we all museum tours. A group of us went to Leopoldstadt recently. There's an intergenerational brunch. If you have children, grandchildren, friends, cousins in New York or Long Island or anywhere, we have 12 chapters. Please spread the word about our events. I also just wanted to add, I called my grandma on the way here to see if she had a message for everybody. She basically, when she found out about the October 7th attack, we had her aide call 911. She just couldn't handle, it was devastating to her. She said, felt like something I had already lived happening again. And, on her message to everyone here was, keep sharing the stories, never forget. And then we also talked about the difference between now and then is today we have Israel. And today, my grandma has 2 great grandchildren, my daughters. So that was a really powerful, conversation with her that because of this, we have to do everything we can to make sure there is no never again.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you. Rob Panzer and myself are the co-chairs of the Showa Remembrance Committee. Thank you, Allison, Jolie, Gail, for presenting this. It's remarkable. What 3G is doing, particularly what 3GNY is doing, is far beyond anything as a 2G, as far beyond anything as a 2G myself have seen. And I think you have social media, you have the ability to expand this. But I wanted to ask one question, okay? What impact has this had on your own lives, participating in 3GNY?
I've never felt more proud to be Jewish. And I'm so lucky and proud to be able to share my story, and I only wish that I could share it. I had more opportunities to share it. But it's unfortunately with the lack of survivors at this point, it's, if not the next best thing, the next best thing. So it's made me just so proud to be Jewish and be able to share the story.
It's just made me louder and prouder.
The community we've built, just having so many friends, family, peers that share this connection has been really powerful. The other piece is, as a mother, seeing my older daughter who's 9 really take an interest and want to start coming to things and starting to really understand her legacy, because the 4th generation is our key for keeping this going too.
Great. As a follow-up to this, we want to publicize 3GNY. We want to get grandchildren of survivors involved. We want to, okay. We want to get as much out into the community so that we become more active in remembering the past. Thank you.
I was gonna say it.
We're wondering if we should have asked for money. Sometimes people are so moved. Yeah.